welcome. You're watching World 360. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. Now, the UN Rights Office has called on France to address deep issues of racism in policing as the country is rocked by violence. In Russia, the Wagner mutiny may have ended swiftly, but it has destroyed the mystique of Russian President Vladimir Putin as an untouchable autocrat. And the US Supreme Court has ended race-based admissions in a move to prioritize meritocracy over racial diversities. Those are some of our lead stories, but first up are the headlines. France rocked by violent protests sparked by the police killing of a 17-year-old. 45,000 police have been deployed nationwide, while 1,300 rioters have been arrested. The United Nations says that France must address deep issues of racial discrimination in its police. Russian lawmaker claims that the Wagner Group will no longer fight in Ukraine. Prigozhin's rebellion may have ended quickly, but has left much panic and uncertainty for Putin and the Kremlin. The US Supreme Court blocks Biden's student loan forgiveness program and limits LGBTQ protections. This soon after SCOTUS ruled that universities cannot consider race-based admissions. US President Joe Biden condemns this Supreme Court ruling. And China passes new foreign policy law consolidating Xi Jinping's powers to counter Western hegemony, especially the US. Let's dive into the segment with our top focus on the rebellion that took place in Russia. Wagner's chief Prigozhin has challenged Russia's President Putin in several ways. Not only has it dented Putin's strongman image, but also created much panic within the Kremlin. The mutiny has raised questions about the fate of the war in Ukraine as well. Now, even though Prigozhin's anger had been simmering for a while, the mutiny began on 24th of June when Wagner marched on Moscow. Prigozhin had accused Russian forces of attacking and killing mercenaries at a forest camp. Now, Russia's defense ministry denied this. After an intense few days, the Wagner chief left Russia owing to negotiations hemmed by Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. A few days ago, Lukashenko confirmed that Prigozhin was in Belarus. Lukashenko has already patted himself on the back for playing peacemaker and for quelling Moscow's most serious security crisis in decades. The Wagner revolt has severely damaged Putin's image, though. For Prigozhin, the biggest boon is Putin dropping insurrection charges against him. Kiev is, of course, reveling in this chaos. But is it a winner-takes-it-all for the Belarusian strongman Alexander Lukashenko? After all, Belarus, often regarded as Moscow's junior partner, is now hosting one of the world's most skilled mercenary groups. But more importantly, is this a chance for Lukashenko to regain his influence the way it had been in the 90s with the Union State? Now, beyond this, according to a Russian lawmaker, the Wagner Group and its chief Prigozhin have been told that the mercenary group can no longer fight in Ukraine. This because Prigozhin reportedly declined to sign contracts which the Wagner chief believed would bring his mercenaries under the sway of Russia's defense ministry. That also meant that Wagner would not receive any state money. Now, according to Colonel General Andrei Kartapolov, it was this demand by Russia's defense ministry which triggered Saturday's mutiny. Let's try and get in a sense of perspective, and for that, let me introduce my guests. I'm joined in by Bishop Garrison and Edward P. Joseph. Many thanks to you, gentlemen, for joining in. Let me begin with Bishop, who is the Vice President for Policy at the Intelligence and National Security Alliance. Bishop, what future awaits Russia's Wagner army and its boss Prigozhin now that it's being reported that Prigozhin is in Belarus?
Well, one would hope, at least from a Wagner Group perspective, that this could be the beginning of the end. They've continually had activities across the globe, particularly on the African continent, and they have a horrible reputation in the way that they carry out these types of activities. Hired guns. They're a mercenary group that is looking to get the job done by any means necessary, and they do not carry themselves considerably or enter into their operations with regard to the laws of land warfare or respect traditionally for what we've considered within armed conflicts in terms of operations to protect individual human rights and individual civil rights. So one would think and one would begin to hope that this is the beginning of the end in terms of General Prigozhin. We simply do not know. Vladimir Putin has a reputation for not taking light to betrayals or to disloyalty. And this is exactly what we've seen in this situation. So one would have to believe that he's going to see some type of ramifications from these actions. But still, I think it's a little early to speculate on some of these parts.
All right. Let me also quickly go across to Edward P. Joseph of Johns Hopkins University. He's also a foreign policy analyst. Edward, this mutiny has severely dented Putin's pride and his image as a strong man. Has the rebellion challenged Putin's authority as an autocrat?
Vladimir Putin, who, as you say correctly, Akansha, had to back down. He granted essentially amnesty to Prigozhin after labeling this treason, after labeling this a mutiny. He has now backed down. What does that signal? That signals to other Russians that Vladimir Putin is no longer this invincible, invulnerable character, that he may not be this glue that keeps this corrupt mafia state together at a time when they're struggling so badly on the battlefield and in the face of these united and very strong Western sanctions. And really, the question here is for someone like Prime Minister Modi of India. Do you really want to stay on the fence, given this kind of abject weakness and disarray displayed by Russia? Is Russia at all some kind of an asset for a proud and very strong country like India? And these are questions I think that in Delhi, people should be asking, Prime Minister Modi should be asking, because I can tell you in Beijing, President Xi Jinping is definitely asking himself these questions after so lavishly throwing his support behind Putin not long ago with this 3-day visit to Moscow. So it's really Vladimir Putin who comes out of this looking extremely weak. Obviously, Prigozhin does as well, but he's a less significant character, of course, than the Russian president.
All right. Please. Many thanks to you, Edward and Bishop, for joining in with your precious inputs. And with that, I shall focus over to China. The country has passed a comprehensive foreign relations law that grants it the authority to impose countermeasures against perceived threats. Now, this new foreign policy law is set to take effect on 1st of July. It also reflects Beijing's ongoing efforts to strengthen its position amid strained relationship with Western countries, especially the United States. Now, the new law stresses its right to take corresponding countermeasures and restrictive measures against acts that violate international law, along with norms that endanger the country's sovereignty, security, even development interests. It also bans the transfer of any information related to national security and broadens the definition of spying. Let's try and get in a sense of perspective in terms of what this law will mean for China. And for that, I'm joined in by China's geostrategist Andrew K.P. Lung. Many thanks to you, Mr. Lung, for joining in. Why is the new law being touted as one that aims to consolidate Xi Jinping's power and counters Western hegemony, especially the United States?
American people, over 90% of them, have a negative view of China, regarding China as an existential threat. So there is a 360 degrees pushback against China on trade, on technology, in the South China Sea, on human rights, and also in world geopolitics, allying the Americans, Western allies, to contain China. As you can see, if you look at the map, along China's eastern seaboard, you have recently a closer alliance between South Korea and Japan, and then further down you have, of course, the Philippines also been coming on board to adopt a more confrontational stance against China. And then, of course, you have Australia. You have, of course, India joining the Quad a long time ago. And then even mobilizing NATO allies and creating also the Asian NATO to contain China. And then, of course, the Chinese people are quite angry in support of President Xi. In fact, according to the Harvard Kennedy School and various other research, Elderman Trust and the Ipsos IPSOS based in Paris, the Communist Party government is the most supported by its people compared with many Western democracies, including the United States.
Okay. Mr. Lung, how will the new law help China at a time when the world economy is talking about de-risking its reliance on China, that too in terms of supply chain?
Well, first of all, let's talk about the China's strength. Even at this time, uncertain times, in spite of the worsening demographics and so on, China still remains the largest trading partner to many more countries than the United States, 128 compared with the United States 58. And according to the IMF, China would be the greatest contributor to global growth during the next 5 years. And that statement was made in April, just now, and recently. And also, if you look at the data for the past 10 years, China has been contributing to global growth more than the G7 combined. This is because China is the largest trader, the world's largest trader, the world's largest manufacturer, and then this is in the heart of the world's supply and value chain, closely embedded. No matter even the products are not made in China, China will be involved either in terms of components like rare earths, materials, assembly, components, manufacturing, logistics, because the world's top 7 container ports are all in China, including Hong Kong. So this suggests that the rhetoric change from decoupling to de-risking takes cognizance of this reality. Even at de-risking, there's that much you can do. I mean, for example, on rare earths, China controls about over 90%, or if not more, including production.
All right.
So it will be a long, long time before the West could decouple from China.
Right. Many thanks to you, Mr. Lung, for joining in with those details. And with that, we have some big news coming in from Brazil. Former President of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, has been barred from running for political office until 2030. 5 out of 7 judges found Bolsonaro guilty of abusing his powers. The case stems from a meeting Bolsonaro held with foreign ambassadors back in July 2022, in which he spread false information about Brazil's electoral system and brought its credibility into question just ahead of last year's fractious election. In terms of legal options, Jair Bolsonaro can appeal to the Supreme Court. But it's important to contextualize why this is going to be very tricky for the far-right movement as far as Brazil is concerned. It's not only going to come as a major dent to that far-right movement that has been on in Brazil for some time, but is also taking away one of the leading contenders for Brazil's next presidential election. And with that, I now shift attention over to France. Paris has been witnessing violence and unrest on the streets for the last few days after a 17-year-old teenager was shot dead at a traffic stop this week. His name is Nahel. In the ensuing protests, close to 13,000 people have been arrested and over 500 police personnel have been injured. Over 40 vehicles, oil bus depots, Marseille's largest public library and several places have been set on fire. Over 40,000 police personnel have been deployed on the ground in an effort to calm this chaos. While speaking to journalists, the French President Macron said, and let me quote, nothing justifies the death of a young man, but Macron's attendance at an Elton John concert has also garnered much criticism. In fact, the French president also dropped plans to attend an EU summit on Friday owing to these protests.
There is an unacceptable instrumentalization of the death of a teenager, which we all deplore. But this time should be about contemplation and respect. In the face of this, I formally condemn those who are using this situation and this time to try and create disorder and target our institutions. The responsibility they bear is damning, and I firmly condemn, we all do, this pure and unjustifiable violence that has no legitimacy.
For more details, CNN's Nick Robertson joins us live from Paris. Thank you for joining in, Nick. Can you tell us more about the protests, especially about the severity of these protests?
The severity of the protests appears to have eased off overnight, particularly in Paris, Marseille, and a higher level of violence there, and also in Lyon, where shots were fired and 2 police officers were injured. And the Interior Ministry today now sending their elite anti-riot police to Lyon as a measure, particularly because of that incident of the shooting. But overall, what we've seen is from Friday compared to Thursday, more police on the streets, up from 40,000 to 45,000. They now have bigger, stronger armored vehicles. There is a ban on big public gatherings. Buses and trams have been taken off the road after 9 p.m. in the evening. But actually, the number of detentions has gone up. Police detained over 1,300 people. But the number of incidents, the number of vehicles burned, the number of police attacked, the number of schools destroyed, the number of city halls destroyed, that actually went down last night. So I think there is a collective hope that maybe the government's security measures are going to work. But of course, today, Saturday, has been a particularly tense time, because the funeral for Nael, the 17-year-old who was shot and killed by the police, has literally just taken place on the street behind me at a mosque attended by perhaps 1,000 or so mourners.
Right. And as you rightly pointed out, Nick, the funeral of Nael has started in the Paris suburb of Nanterre, where he lived. Give us a sense of the atmosphere.
Yeah, it was very respectful. We were outside the mosque. There were many mourners, hundreds of mourners outside the mosque on the street taking part in those prayers, as well as, of course, all the mourners inside the mosque. Nael's body will be taken away for burial this afternoon. But a very quiet, very respectful service without violence, which is exactly what his mother had called for. She welcomed anyone to come. She said that she wanted people to be respectful. So in terms of the funeral, it's been everything that a mother could hope it would be. A lot of people, a lot of respect, a lot of compassion being observed. I think the broader concerns in the community here in Nanterre, because the service took place not far behind me, and more widely across the country, what's the ripple effect tonight? Are the tensions going to stay really high, escalate, or are they going to go down?
All right. Many thanks to you, Nick Robertson, for bringing in all those precious inputs from Paris. And with that, it's time to slip into a quick break. But after the break, Islamic nations denouncing the Quran burning in Sweden is going to be our top focus. How will this impact Sweden? We'll find out after a quick break.